podcast, where Mainers tell their stories, unfiltered.
Good evening, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and you are watching the Muddy Waters podcast. As you know, the Muddy Waters podcast exists, generally speaking, to help people of Maine better understand what's going on in our state. Although we're doing some additional, historically, I've largely focused on what's going on specifically here in the state of Maine, but we're kind of branching out a little bit and talking about some more nationally focused things because I think there are things that we should be talking and thinking about, and how what's happening nationally is kind of impacting even what's happening here in the state of Maine. So we have with us once again Forrest Robinson. Thank you for joining us here, Forrest.
Thank you for having me, Chuck.
We always have a good conversation, so it's fun, and we talk about things you're not supposed to talk about sometimes, which I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today is going to some degree go in that direction because of what we're talking about. It's one of the things that's interesting is I've been thinking this about the Republican Party in general. Like there are a lot of things going on in our world that are like scary, right? Globally, here in our country, like some of the terrible injustices that are being carried out by the left across the country. In the midst of it, we've been very fortunate to have this really unified, moral and just Republican Party just like working together no, we haven't, right? Instead, we've had this like very like divided, fractured, like loose alliance is what it feels like on the Republican side. And we're, a big part of the reason that Trump won, and I think you'll agree with me on this, is not because people were necessarily, some of them obviously were, in love with Trump and MAGA and what it stands for, but more as like, especially among the youth, a rejection of wokeism and a rejection of the horrific policies of the Democrat Party and the establishment in general. Right. And so we are this very fractured, loose alliance at a time where the left is very dangerous and there's some bad things going on in the world. And we desperately need to be working together against this evil. And instead, here we are. Am I delayed?
No, I think you're
okay.
Good.
All right. So what are your thoughts on that, I guess, to start, and then we'll kind of get into some of the other fun stuff that we're within, I guess, as that kind of like builds out. Like,
yeah. I guess Trump, he really revolutionized the Republican Party. For the past week or so, just for nostalgic reasons, I've been going back and watching the old Republican debates, with like Jeb Bush and Chris Christie. And it's crazy. Like, I mean, this was 10 years ago now, pretty much, around this time. And just the stuff that you couldn't talk about then that's so mainstream now, it's unbelievable. And Trump, you could say, is single-handedly responsible for moving the goalpost on so many different issues, especially immigration. Because, I mean, Ted Cruz, his platform at the time, when he was running for president, he was talking about mass deportations and whatnot. But, you look at Jeb Bush, you look at the others, they were all very weak on immigration. And Trump, he really came to the fore and changed the Republican Party forever. Moved it in more of a populist direction, whereas the old party was like of Paul Ryan, Mitt Romney, Newt Gingrich, all these guys that, weren't really hell bent on challenging the status quo, on challenging, the neoconservative consensus, which, is built on like building democracies in Afghanistan and Iraq and ignoring the people of America, the people of middle America, that Trump really, he ushered in their support, the forgotten American. But now, we already had one Trump administration, and a lot of people say that the failure of the first Trump administration was the personnel. A lot of people say personnel is policy. You can have the right ideas, you can have the right vision, and everything, but if you don't have the right people to execute that vision, those policies, then really it's going to fail. And Trump struggled, even though he had the House, the Senate, and the executive branch. um, we didn't get a border wall. I mean, we got a little bit of a border wall, which was great, but um, regardless, he didn't deliver on a lot of his promises. And then, of course, he lost in 2020. And now, we have Trump back again in the White House. And, there's been a lot of dialogue amongst the right. Like, I remember, just to kind of make a little detour here, I remember back in I think it was 2019, this schism within the right wing started to emerge. And to put everything in context, basically, the way that the right wing used to be is there's a term for it. It's called fusionism, and basically, there's a bunch of different you know parts of the right wing. There's the libertarians that are, very laissez-faire in terms of their economics. There's the war hawks, the neoconservatives that, you know, want to build democracies abroad and are very, interventionist and whatnot, believe in a strong military. And then there's the social conservatives, which are, the pro-life part of the Republican Party, the Christians, the traditionalists. And what happened during, the Cold War is all these different groups kind of found a common enemy within the USSR because it was atheist, it was socialist, communist, and it was a threat to the republic, to us. So, the war hawks, the libertarians, and the social conservatives all had a common enemy that united them. Now, after the Cold War ended, these different parts of the Republican Party started to fracture. And then, fast forward a couple decades, with the legalization of gay marriage and all these different, triumphs that the left had achieved in the public square, and its takeover of Hollywood and the media, basically the rise of this woke managerial class. Then you had Trump come along and be like, no, the Republicans, you guys, Newt Gingrich, Mitt Romney, Chris Christie, Jeb Bush, all you guys are complicit in the left's takeover of the institutions. I'm going to come along and I'm going to blow this shit up. And that's what he did. And we're kind of living in the post-Trump era where, Trump, he didn't really have an ideological vision. It was more so he ran on instinct. He knew what he was fighting against, not so much what he was fighting for. And now the right, now that Trump ascended, in this move, Trump's not going to be able to run in 2028, even though he would like to. We're kind of deciding what is the future of nationalism, of populism, of MAGA, and there's these competing visions right now. Of course, there's a lot of different events happening across the globe, which are relevant to this schism that's happening within the Republican Party. Um, Biggest of which is what's going on in Israel right now, the war in Gaza, but of course also what's happening in Ukraine and with Russia, but domestically also. So I guess we could kind of start there. Um, and we can talk about something that has happened recently, which has really kind of shed light on this schism. This podcast that happened recently with Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson. So,
Yeah.
what were your thoughts on that?
Well,
Have you seen
so
the podcast yet?
so I haven't seen the whole podcast. I did start watching it, and I kind of like perused, some of what I've kind of more done research on it because I haven't had the time to look into it as much as as much as I would like. And it's I would say it's interesting to note that, like, as far as I can tell, from all the research that I've done, Tucker has not said anything that is considered to be anti-Semitic, and yet he's being called an anti-Semite simply by, like, it's like, again, there's this, like, seems to be this consensus from a certain portion of the right, Ted Cruz being one of the examples of this, that Fuentes is, it's pretty understood or agreed upon by many people that Fuentes is, anti-Semitic, and there are comments that he said that lead them to believe that, and I don't know that that's necessarily true. I haven't had enough time looking into all the different things that Fuentes has said. He's obviously been around, as you kind of had alluded to, I think, before we came on. You discovered him back in like 2019, so he's been around for a while, so I can't speak to everything that he said. I do know that he said some things that I'm like, I probably wouldn't say that, but not necessarily meaning that it proves anti-Semitism. But there's this, like, seems to be a consensus that he is anti-Semitic, and so therefore, by Tucker having a conversation with him and not specifically calling him out and telling him he's wrong, is anti-Semitic. And there are also a number of other I think, what did he do? His comments, I think, recently about, I don't know. I feel like I can't go on X and not find people, like, trying to call out and condemn Tucker Carlson as an anti-Semite. And I just keep doing research, and I'm like, I feel like some of this reminds me, right? This is happening on the right, but some of it reminds me of what happens to Trump on the regular, right? He'll say something, it'll be taken out of context, and people will try to condemn him for it. And a lot of that seems to be what's happening to Tucker at the moment, right? People are taking things that he said out of context. So, for instance, there was a post I saw where it had to do with what's going on in Nigeria. And he was basically just talking about how it's really weird that all of a sudden Trump and Ted Cruz care about what's happening to Christians in Nigeria. It's just like he even makes the comment in his thing, like, I don't know if it's real or not, like, obviously saying I haven't done the research on this, and like not saying whether or not we should support it, but just it's weird that all of a sudden they care about it, because and the reality is, if you do the research, it seems like whatever's been happening there has been happening for a while. So it is kind of weird and odd that all of a sudden now it's an issue. The post in which this clip existed was one where somebody was saying that Tucker was denying that this was happening in Nigeria. And I'm like, I mean, I literally just listened to the clip that you published here, and that's not what was being said. And so I think part of what's interesting to me is, is what's kind of happening, I think, in the wake of, yeah, I guess I'd still say that a lot of this is happening in the wake of, the loss that we have on the right of Charlie Kirk, and both in terms of his voice to be able to speak reason into this situation, right? Because that's, if he were around, as much as, like, everybody's saying things like we've now created a million Charlie Kirks, where there really only was one Charlie Kirk, and a lot of people might rise to the surface and get involved in politics and do good things, but nobody had the influence that has the influence that Charlie had, and nobody had the ear of the president in the way that both the combination of the ear to the grassroots and the ear to the president that Charlie Kirk had, right? And, like, this is a moment where I wish we had him here to interpret, what's going on, or enter into the conversation, or have some influence. And unfortunately, he's not here, both in terms of how things are going to, I think, impact national politics, because there's a lot of concern and frustration with some of the things that Trump is saying, right, as well, about, like, H-1B visas and stuff like that. I will say, like, really briefly, and then we'll kind of go more into, like, what's kind of going on, as far as I understand it, with Tucker and Fuentes, and you, who, having listened to Fuentes more, you can speak with much more authority about that. But Trump, one of the things that I will say about Trump is, like, no president actually ever accomplishes what they say they're going to do, right? Like, that's just a reality. In my lifetime, nobody has been as successful, even with all the problems that he had in his first administration, at doing the best that they could to address those things, right? This like, I would say this nonsense of well, we had the House and we had the Senate and we had the presidency and we didn't get anything done. And it's like, well, we all know that like a significant portion of, both parties are a bunch of people that are the deep state, they're the uniparty, right? And so like it's even if you like right now, like if the Democrats during the shutdown, they're really excited to talk about the fact that the Republicans have control of the House, the Senate, and the White House. Why can't they do this? It's like because you, in order to avoid the filibuster, you need 60 votes, stupid, and they have 53. Okay, so like this is actually very, very simple. The Democrats are blocking this. It's not and so like there's this reality that even when you have control, you don't ever have enough control. Even if they had 60 votes, they would still have the Susan Collins of the world who, I appreciate Susan Collins. She's one of the best that we could have coming out of the state of Maine, because we're a purple state that's more blue than purple. We're really more light blue, and so the fact that we even have somebody that has any resemblance of a Republican is something that I appreciate. However, like she's not gonna, she's not MAGA, right? And so, there are going to be in some cases, she might be a holdout, or some other people might be a holdout, because one of the things that I don't agree with Susan Collins on everything, but she sticks to her guns and she has her views and her values, and she's going to vote according to those. She's not going to like just do what Trump would want her to do or MAGA would want her to do, however you want to put that. And then you've got Lisa Murkowski and you've got Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, and a number of people that are like not. I mean, they might be registered Republicans in office, but are they really people who care about the American people? And so even if you have a position of power, even if you have a majority, like being able to actually accomplish real meaningful change is really challenging.
Right.
I said a lot of things, but like that, I feel like it's important to note that like Trump did so much of like he worked really, I mean, I don't know if it worked really hard, but he did a lot of, he was one of the most honest like politicians that said, this is what I'm going to do, got in there and tried to do it. And yeah, he wasn't as successful as many of us would have liked to be. And again, as you said, it was a belief that that it was like the personnel, and the hope was coming into this, now he's got better people advising him and he's going to get better people in his personnel. And I think that ultimately there's a couple of possibilities of what's going on with Trump right now. One is that what's happening in the world that he's aware of is much more complex than we can understand. And that there are the people out there that are just like Trump is the fourth member of the Trinity. Don't doubt anything that he says. And he's playing 5D, 10D chess all the time, and you don't even have any idea. And he's got but I'm not there, right? But like, I do think that it's possible that there's stuff that he's aware of that we don't understand, and there may be a good reason that if we were in his situation, we would maybe approve of the decision that he's making. But it's a decision that, from where I sit, like has me feeling a little like, well, this is not exactly what I was hoping you were going to do. Such as like with the one big beautiful bill, the fact that that set to increase the national deficit by $5 trillion. And some of the stuff they're talking about now is in order to make it so that Zoomers and millennials can buy homes, that we're going to, make a 50-year mortgage. And it's like, how's that different than renting? Again, like, I don't know that is really what that's not really what MAGA wanted. That's not what, young people who are like, we're going to vote Republican because we're rejecting the insanity on the left. I don't think they were sitting there thinking, I really am hoping that Trump's going to make it so I can have a 50-year mortgage, right? I think they were thinking, I really hope I can afford a house with a 30-year mortgage. Like, how do we get there? That's where we want to get. And I think so, like, yeah, there's stuff that's like happening. It's like, I don't know what's going on, or if this is just the best that we can do at this point, that too much damage essentially has been done in the printing of money and all that nonsense, and some of the other things that are going on, that like it's practically impossible to unwind. Or if it is, again, just really a personnel issue, that like that he, as good, as well-meaning as you can be, that he still put some of the wrong people in positions of leadership. Like, I think there's a lot of concern from, a lot of your traditional conservatives, or not traditional conservatives, a lot of people that I trust, I would say, have concern with like Kash Patel and a number of other people in the administration who have ties to historic, deep state, we'll say, in some way. And so is it that he's being given the wrong advice? So there's a lot of things around Trump that I think are a huge question that I just felt like is worth noting. But again, without Charlie to kind of interpret it, but that's separate from like the schism that's happening as a result of, I think Fuentes is like trying to rise to more prominence. In the wake of Charlie Kirk, there's a space for that, and I think a lot more people who, without Charlie, are starting to look for who else is out there, and voices on the right that they can trust. And obviously, Tucker has been somebody that a lot of people have already trusted, and then people are starting to look to Fuentes to a degree. And I think that there's a good reason, I think, in my opinion, to be concerned with some of the things that Fuentes has said and kind of stands for. But anyway, that's
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess my criticisms for Trump can be saved for later, but I guess it would be good to talk a little bit about Nick Fuentes for those who
Yeah.
don't know him, because he's still, I mean, he's not like a household name. He's got quite a lot of name recognition now because of Tucker, but I guess I'll talk about how I discovered him and what I've learned about him. So anyways, back in 2019, I was scrolling through Twitter, or what's now X, and I stumbled across this video, this live stream VOD from Nick Fuentes, who I didn't know at the time. I knew of the alt right because Ben Shapiro had talked about them and say that they're basically beyond the pale. They're the actual racists, not us. So we should just not traffic in their ideas or engage with them or platform them. So I was kind of part of that crowd. I was still starting to question you know establishment conservatism and whatnot. I'd been reading Patrick Deneen at the time, and I was starting to take a more communitarian bent in my politics and whatnot, less individualist. But anyway, so I saw this video of Nick Fuentes, and it was this series of clips where he had gotten his groypers, which groyper, for those who don't know the term, is basically like a follower of Nick Fuentes. The groyper is like kind of like Pepe the Frog, which is like this internet meme. So that's like the designation for like a Nick Fuentes follower. So he had a bunch of groypers at this Q&A event that was being hosted by Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk was touring the country with forget the guy's name. He's a conservative influencer. He's worked with PragerU, but he's a gay guy. And anyways, so a bunch of Nick Fuentes' fans basically went up to the mic and were taking Charlie Kirk to task on a bunch of different issues, some of which concerned Israel. Charlie Kirk had made a comment in the past where he basically said we should staple green cards to diplomas. So they were, holding his feet to the fire on that and on immigration, because at the time he was pro legal immigration, just anti illegal immigration. And Nick Fuentes and his fans were like, both legal and illegal immigration is affecting Native Americans, people who live here, who were born here, and who will die here.
And to be clear, not Native Americans as Native Americans, but people born natural born citizens. I think
natural born citizens. Yeah, that's a better term. And there were a couple controversial comments that some of the groypers made, like this gay guy that was on the stage with Charlie Kirk, openly gay. One of the questions was, how does anal sex help us win the culture war? Which is like kind of a crazy thing to say, but that kind of, goes to show what Nick Fuentes and, the groyper crowd is kind of like. They're very, a lot of them grew up online or around my age and aren't really afraid to just kind of think out loud and say, whatever they want to say. But anyways, to give you a little background of Nick Fuentes, he talks about his history, his kind of story on Tucker Carlson. He was always into politics from a young age. I think from the age of 13, he started reading Thomas Sowell and a bunch of different libertarians. And He ended up majoring in international relations at Boston University. Um, and he was like the only person on his campus that was pro-Trump. He would walk around with a MAGA hat, and people would like, you know, throw shade at him because of it. Even I guess some people even threatened to kill him or hurt him because of it. And there was one event, I think it was with the student body president. This was shortly before um, the election in November, which would decide the president. Nick Fuentes debated the student body president, who was pro Hillary, pro, Democrat. Um, and he performed so well at this debate that there was this woman here. There was this woman there. I forget her name. Who was connected with Ben Shapiro. She was periscoping the event, which is like live streaming basically. And the people at the Daily Wire, including Ben Shapiro, were very impressed. Nick was very articulate, well spoken, knowledgeable. So they tried to take Nick under their wing. And as Nick started communicating with that crowd more, um, they got to know him better. He'd go to their parties and whatnot. And then Nick at the time started questioning the right's loyalty to Israel. And as he started, I mean, he wasn't like anti-Zionist or anything. He was just like, why do we give $3.5 billion to Israel every year? And why do we give them so much more money than any other country if they're, just a small, tiny country in the Middle East? So as he started questioning that, consensus more, he started to get a lot of flack from people at the Daily Wire. They were like, you can't talk about that. And Nick was kind of disenchanted, disenchanted with Republicans because of this experience, since all that you heard at the time from Republicans is that we're the champions of free speech. Let's engage in the open marketplace of ideas. If somebody has a bad idea, don't censor them. Just have a good faith discussion with them and let your better ideas win out in the end. But for whatever reason, this topic of discussion was something that you couldn't even approach, couldn't even entertain. It was just something that you had to accept if it meant entering into, the conservative world. So Nick kind of, I guess you could say, became a martyr. He was basically shut out from the conservative movement because he started to take a more anti-Zionist position. And in the years since, he's hosted this show on a bunch of different platforms called America First. And, he's basically a paleo conservative, which is different from a regular conservative. A paleo conservative is more in the tradition of Patrick Buchanan, John Derbyshire, Sam Francis, which were also conservatives that were blacklisted or censored. Sam Francis, for example, and Jared Taylor were both censored and basically shut out of the conservative movement by Dinesh D'Souza, who I'll bring up later. But yeah, basically, Nick, he started this show called America First, and he started out with a small audience. It started to grow gradually over time, and let's see. Sorry, kind of having a brain fart here.
No, that's
Oh yeah,
fine.
so he faced a lot of blowback from conservatives and the government too, and of course, big tech. He was censored from YouTube, from D Live. He was debanked, and because he was at January 6th, he didn't go inside the Capitol, but he was subpoenaed by Congress. He was put on a no-fly list without, he just went to go fly one day and he basically could not fly. So he basically became unpersoned by the government. And of course, he was shut out of the conversation. Nobody would debate him in the conservative movement. And I think the reason why he garnered such a huge following over the years is because people look at his story, and how he's been treated. And you got to ask yourself, he's just a young guy in his house, sitting in front of a green screen talking about, Israel or demographics or race. And just by talking, he's suffered all of these like horrific, you know, repercussions. Like just last year, someone, some crazy person, after the election, Nick made a post on his Twitter account, saying "Your body, my choice forever" after Trump won last year, and it ended up getting like over 100 million impressions on X, and a bunch of people were super pissed at him. It was rage bait, basically. Um, and I guess one disgruntled whack job saw that tweet, ended up going to his house with a gun and a crossbow. And, you could see on the ring camera this guy outside Nick Fuentes' house, um, basically calling his name. And the cops ended up coming. And the guy that went there to try and kill Nick ended up killing two dogs, and finally he was shot. And that wasn't the first incident. There was another woman, that went to his house because his address was doxxed by the left, and she went up to his door, and Nick opened the door and pepper sprayed her, and it became this whole legal issue. But it's just, you know the reason why I've followed him and why I respect him, honestly, even though yeah, he's made some pretty crazy comments and jokes and whatnot, is because I'm like, I don't really care if he makes a racist joke or anything. Like, I really don't. I feel like we're past that point, and the right is kind of being hypocritical with its hand wringing and its holier than thou pearl clutching mentality. Like, yeah, he's made some crazy jokes, but like, so do comedians. You know what I mean? And he's not a comedian. He's also political commentator, so he should be held to a higher standard. I get that, but like, you know, Nick goes on this podcast with Tucker, and Tucker's like, he doesn't even agree with a lot of what Nick says, but just merely by associating with him, Tucker is branded as an anti-Semite. And it's like, how is that any different from the left, who says, "Oh, you can't have this person if you're platforming them, you're platforming their ideas. Now you're part of the problem." It's gatekeeping, and the reason why they are gatekeeping in the first place is because they fear how popular Nick has become, and he's become popular with no institutional backing. He he's pretty much garnered this following all on his own without the help of anybody. He never got his college degree or anything. He just sits behind a camera and talks. And he doesn't run ads, unlike Ben Shapiro, who, reads ads for ZipRecruiter at a March for Life rally in Washington, D.C., which is disgusting. But yeah, just, you know, he's garnered this following just because of his ideas. And people want to shut him out or try and, say that he's somebody that he's not. And I don't really have, like, I mean, a lot of people have genuine, critiques of him that aren't trying to, like, that don't resort to like blinded, oh, he's just a racist, he's an anti-Semite, like he shouldn't be talking. Some people have actual genuine critiques, which I think should be heard. But like, he's here to stay. He's not going anywhere unless they try and kill him, which honestly at this point I wouldn't be surprised, because people have already tried to kill him. But yeah, and I think, like, you know he says some crazy stuff. Sorry, I'm kind of going on a tangent here.
No, you're good.
He says some crazy stuff. He's made jokes about the Holocaust, which I know is, even though I've heard comedians, left-wing comedians make jokes about the Holocaust. It's like the one thing that you just can't, talk about in a joking way, even though we joke about everything else. Um, Hearing the right say that Nick Fuentes has no place within the conservative movement because he's immoral or he's sexist or misogynist. I think about some of the things that Republicans have been saying recently that are in the mainstream, that are in Washington, D.C., that are in that world, like Randy Fine, who, after someone made an X post to him talking about the genocide in Gaza, how even babies are being killed, and I think someone even posted a picture of a dead child, a dead Palestinian child, and they said to Randy Fine, like, how can you sleep at night knowing that you're complicit in this mass murdering event which involves women and children? And he said responded back, I sleep great. And this is a sitting member of Congress. And these people are the ones that are getting, pissed at Nick Fuentes because he made a joke, 2 years ago. But Nick Fuentes, he's not voting to send, money to the IDF or Israel so they can continue just mass slaughtering people in Gaza. And then I also think about comments other popular figures, other popular conservative influencers have made, like um, Dennis Prager had um, this Catholic on. This was a while ago, but they were talking about AI and how in the future, especially as this technology becomes deregulated, we're going to have to worry about children being depicted in a pornographic light using AI. And Dennis Prager said, for AI child porn to be considered wrong, there has to be a victim.
Prager said that?
Yeah, he said that. In other words, since AI child porn actually doesn't involve a real child, that doesn't that basically means it's not inherently evil. He said that. And that's Dennis Prager, co-founder of PragerU, who makes a bunch of videos for children. And
well, let's be clear, the videos that he makes are
yeah,
above board. They're good videos. I think your point is that he runs this organization. He's a very prominent person on the right, and made a comment that is not really okay, right?
Yeah,
like
and
I just want to highlight that the videos that he makes are actually really good. We need like a main base PragerU. I believe you actually did a little internship with him, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I met him. I actually sat in on his podcast. And I met Alan Estrin, who helped co-found the company with him. And I think they do great work. But again, I remember even being there, like it's kind of funny. This is a little aside, but Kash Patel is dating a young woman who worked at PragerU, who's connected with the IDF. And there's been some people like Elijah Schaefer, who's a conservative commentator, used to work at the Blaze, who made this tweet. It's a picture of Kash Patel and his girlfriend, and he basically said like she's an Israeli honeypot. And now Kash Patel I'm not sure if it's Kash Patel or that girl who he's dating. They're suing Elijah Schaefer for $5 million for making a tweet. So it's like that's your head of the FBI, great guy. Basically says that Epstein killed himself. He's a loser, a hack. But anyways, yeah,
I'm not
I
like
can't stand him.
If you listen, it's hard to listen because Patel he went on with Joe Rogan, and like I listened to the whole thing, and I just was like, I don't trust that he's not being honest with us, or he's an idiot.
Right.
That was the conclusion that I came away with, because especially like there was a section of it where he was talking about how, oh, you're going to see this and you're going to just know for sure that we're giving you the right story. And Joe Rogan is like, well, but wait a second, like AI could create that video. He's like, no, you're gonna be, because of like the quality of the picture. He's like, Joe again is like, but you do understand that AI can do that too, right?
Right.
Like AI is not incapable of making a video that looks old or looks creepy. You know, like it was
Yeah.
actually still in the fact that like Cash thought he was going to get away with that seems to suggest to me that he's either trying to look a little bit like an idiot or actually is an idiot. And so, but
Right.
it's either a deceptive tool to make it look like, oh, I had never even thought of that. I'm just so honest. I hadn't even, this is just true. And so I thought people would understand.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think maybe trying to look a little ignorant there rather than, you know, so either way, I don't trust what he has to has to say on that. But yeah, anyway, Patel, whole nother rabbit trail we could get into, but going back to the point, it's like it sounds like what I'm hearing, right, is that there's this you know, and I agree, like that there is this like cancel culture element that does to a degree exist on the right. It's one of my critiques, and people don't like it when I say it, about how they're like, well, if you're a Democrat and you step out of line, they'll primary you. And I'm like, you mean like us?
Yeah.
Like, and I'm not necessarily like, look, I think like, for instance, Lisa Murkowski, right? She is not a good representative of the people of Alaska who are generally speaking more conservative, whereas she's like barely more of a Democrat than she is a Republican in a lot of ways, right? Like maybe her voting record might be slightly more Republican, but considering like the more conservative nature of the state of Alaska, where they are just much more right wing, like she's not a good representation of the people of Alaska. Unlike Collins, who I would say again, she's not the type of conservative that I would want in Washington, based on like she doesn't completely match up with my values, but she is a good representation of the like the you know, all the different perspectives and views of the people of Maine. I think she actually represents like the combination or the closest thing to, if you put all our values together, what would that amount to be? It would be somebody who's maybe more a little bit more, they're definitely moderate, but more maybe even more left leaning to a degree. And she's like, I've always referred to her as like a moderate Democrat, although I don't think those are allowed to exist anymore. Just ask John Fetterman. But like that's kind of where I've always seen her. You know, because a lot of the, like for me when I was first growing up, like traditionally one of the biggest issues for me was the pro-life movement. I've always been pro-life, and so like if you had a Republican who wasn't pro-life, I would say, oh, that's a Democrat light, essentially, right? And so with Collins, it makes sense given the nature of the state of Maine. With some of these other people, it doesn't make sense. And so I'm in favor of like trying to primary Lisa Murkowski, for instance, but there is a sense in which, aren't we doing the same thing that we're calling out the Democrats for doing?
Right.
Right. And there's this nature of like, well, when we do it, it's okay, but when they do it, it's not okay. And
Right.
maybe that's true, but if that is true, we need to be a lot more clear about what's going on, right? Because, like, yeah, I mean, do we want Lindsey Graham, somebody who, not because just simply calling him a rhino, I don't think is the the right approach. Like, what do you mean? Like, why don't we just say? And again, I don't care if he's a Republican in name only. What I care about is that he's clearly owned by the military industrial complex, right? That's my main, the military industrial complex, pharmaceutical industrial complex, the mega wealthy of the world, the globalists, right? That's who owns him. That's my problem with him. That's why we should get rid of him, not because he's a quote unquote rhino. That makes sense.
Right.
And maybe that's what they're trying to communicate, but it seems a lot more like that cancel culture within the Democrat Party element on the other side, where somebody steps out of line just a little bit, they think for themselves, and we got to get rid of them. That's what the Democrats do here in Maine. This is what you hear a lot. And so my point is, like, don't we do the same thing on the right? And so, like, when you're talking about, like, you know, Prager, Dennis Prager makes that comment, and Cider, who's made a couple comments in here, appreciate you following us, was making the comment that comment that he made is a libertarian, free speech, absolutist, anti-censorship idea. And I agree to some degree, but so here's the reality: that type of material will lead to people abusing children, right? There's a
That's why
reality.
conservatism has conserved nothing. You know, it's really liberalism driving at the speed limit because conservatives, since the left has basically taken over society, we're just like, okay, there's nothing wrong with gay marriage, but we just don't want, you know, transgenders in a drag queen story hour. We don't want that. But it's okay that two gay people get married, and it's a slippery slope. We went from having gay marriage to now people are basically trying to normalize pedophilia and mastectomies for like 9-year-olds. So if you make an economic argument that there's nothing wrong with AI child porn, it's like, okay, well, where does the buck stop? Where do we take a stand and say that yeah, it's wrong for the state to step in and tell private companies what to do, but shouldn't we also take a moral stand and be like, well, I don't want my kids stumbling upon child porn, on the internet. So I that's why like libertarianism is just it's a philosophy that is so amoral, and it has, for a long time it took over the Republican Party, and I'm glad there's voices like Tucker Carlson that are like, you know, I'm not pro capitalist, I'm not pro socialist, I'm pro family. I want to grow up in a country where, you can, your kids are going to do better than you. They can go to college, you can raise a family on one income, you don't have to live paycheck to paycheck. That's my philosophy. And that should be the philosophy of the Republican Party. And since it isn't, since there's still a lot of voices like Ben Shapiro who are saying, "Oh, your manufacturing has been outsourced to China or whatnot. Just move." You know what I mean? It's just that indifference is what's killing the Republican Party, and because of that, you have guys like Zoran Mandami that are winning on just affordability, just on being able to make ends meet. Like, I'm sure a lot of people look at his socialist rhetoric and, hate it in the same way I'm sure a lot of people in Vermont dislike Bernie Sanders. But because he's taking this populist bent, he's just trying to, like when he was at the debate with Curtis Sliwa,
Sliwa,
yeah,
yeah.
and Andrew Cuomo and a bunch of other people that were running for mayor. They were asked a question like, "What's going to be the first place you go to after you become mayor?" All of them said Israel, and of course, like New York City has the highest Jewish population. Actually, there's more Jews in New York City than there are in Israel, so it makes sense. They're speaking to a certain demographic, but you know Zoran Mandami, I got to give him credit. He said, "I'm just going to stay here in New York and focus on New Yorkers." That should be how every politician talks, focusing on us, on Americans, and on making things affordable for us, not on giving money to these foreign countries and whatnot, because this country's going to hell in a handbasket. And
Well,
like,
I don't think everybody realizes that, right? I think part of the problem is people on the right and older people in general. Let's just talk about this. Like they recognize
boomers.
that there are some problem boomers, but not just boomers. Like
Yeah.
like even younger but older than you, groups like, but it's probably Gen X and above, maybe more older people older than Gen X, boomers, but like some, I think Gen X is part of it. But like I think there's this belief that like any of this like alarmism, no matter what type of alarmism you're talking about, people are like, well, it's not really that bad. It can't possibly be that bad. And when I try to explain to people that like I don't like America, one thing needs to happen and it's over. Like our prosperity is over, and it's on its way out anyway, right? Like in a lot of ways, like
Right.
we're really challenged right now, which is evident by the incredible increase in cost of living. And that one thing that just it's over, right? We've lost, chaos will ensue, is if the American dollar is no longer the reserve currency for the world. That when that happens, we're like our currency is going to devalue like Zimbabwe, but maybe worse.
Right.
Like because like your point of like we have to stop worrying about people outside of our country, non-citizens, right? The country exists, the government of a country exists, And the only way that it can work, especially long term, is if the purpose of the government of the country exists to protect and support the citizenry, right?
Right.
Period. Full stop. Primary objective has to be this idea of like America first being this like, oh my gosh, like, well, first of all, let's just be clear about one thing. America first doesn't say America only. It says America first. Right now, we need to save America before we can think about what America can do for the rest of the world, right? And
Right.
and like when you talk about like what's interesting about libertarians, for instance, to go back on that kick, because I love to like I have a lot of sympathies for some of the libertarian ideology, right? Libertarian ideology is built on this minimalist government approach, which I agree with, right? I agree. Like our Constitution was written for limited government. That's the whole idea of our Constitution, was limited government, and libertarianism is in alignment on that. Limited government, yes. The problem is when it comes to issues of borders. Which a prominent libertarian in Maine just got called out on this, who is suggesting that he's for open borders. And so when it comes to borders, when it comes to like trade, well, for some libertarians, there's a lot of division with
I think Ron Paul is pro-life, but
I think generally, I think you're probably right. Many libertarian people are more in favor, okay with abortion because they see it as a limitation on freedom. And I'm like, well, murder is regulated by the government in every other form and fashion. I'm not sure why we would decide here it shouldn't be regulated by the government, but that's a weird conversation. But like when it comes to specifically when it comes to economics, free trade, and foreign and national defense, like I definitely think that we have significant areas of opportunity to cut down on our spending for military, for national defense. I do think we still need a robust military in order. Part of the reason that we've experienced the amount of peace that we have experienced is because of how powerful our military is, and because people have fear of the sword, so to speak. And so having, the way that we've wielded that is a whole nother story. I'm not a fan of the way in which we've, used the CIA and USAID to play, kingmaker essentially in all these other countries, topple governments in order to set up ones that are more favorable to us, and without regard for the people of those nations, right? Those are things I'm definitely not in favor of, but having a robust military is actually really important. So libertarians seem to me fail on that issue. They fail on the border. They fail on things like tariffs. Like tariffs to me are like, why? And I remember very, very much when that first got passed and learning about it. And since then I've thought a lot about it, and I've watched as America's ability to make stuff disappeared, which is a huge national security issue. If we can't make stuff, then we're dependent for our very living. Like, for instance, almost all of our medications are made in China.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look what happened during COVID. We weren't making our own masks. We were getting them all from China.
Yeah.
Yeah. Testing kits, everything.
So the huge problems, but there's also like the drain. So what's this, and then we'll kind of let you go, continue along, and we'll find our way somewhere. I'm not sure where this is going to go because it's a fun conversation. Do want to get back to Fuentes though. Yeah, I agree. Side of the solar panels that we're importing from China. I didn't know that they have a kill switch on them, but that's interesting. Why are we buying all this stuff from China anyway? Why are we not producing anything here? And it's because of tariffs. And so what's really interesting is libertarians want to see the national deficit go away. I'm like, great, let's get rid of it. We need to end the national deficit. However, and we need to pay off the national debt. However, they want free trade, right? Which bankrupts the United States of America. I've had people try to explain to me how a trade deficit, right? And let's just talk about what a trade deficit is when the United States is sending more money out of the country than is coming back in, because we're buying more foreign stuff than we're selling of foreign stuff in other countries. So if one person like myself, like let's say I have a budget deficit, I'm spending more money than I make, eventually I run out of money. eventually I starve because I can't afford to live like that. And we see this here in America. People end up getting into trouble. Now they go try to figure out how to pay off their debt. They file bankruptcy, blah, blah, blah. So that's what happens to an individual. Nationally, like the reality is the same. Like if we're constantly sending more money out than is coming back in, eventually, like that's going to be a problem. And a lot of these like super economists have been like, no, for this reason, and this reason. That's not true. And Rand Paul, I saw him on Russell Brand talking about how, well, actually, according to the data, people in America today are living at a higher level than they were before free trade. And it's like, and Russell Brand, like, again, he's not an economist. I don't know that I would call myself an economist, but I spent 15 years working in commerce and banking and dealing with, and heavily focused on this, paying attention to the stock market, all these things. Like this is what I did: ate, slept, and breathed. I initially was a business econ major, but I shifted to straight mathematics and math and economics. This is like one of my areas of focus, one of my huge areas of interest. And again, Russell Brand, I don't think he would say that, but he responded to Rand Paul by basically being like, I hear what you're saying, but why? I think what people at home are wondering, then why doesn't it feel that way? Why does it feel like we're worse off than we were in the 90s? Because the 90s felt great, by the way, in America. Sorry that you missed them. Now, did everybody have a flat screen TV? Did everybody have a cell phone? No. But like life was great. People had good jobs. They lived good lives. They family, like there was a lot of good stuff. Growing up in the 90s was great. And I feel bad for people who didn't have that opportunity because, I'm not saying it was easy in every way, but it just seemed like it was easier to get ahead in life at that point, much easier than it is today. And I wonder if the data that these libertarians are using is data from like the government, because that's questionable, right? Because if you look at like inflation according to what the government reports, like I think last year they removed coffee from the core inflationary data because coffee had gone up and had increased so much in a short period of time that they're like, maybe we should remove this from. But like some of the stuff that's not included is like housing, right? I'm not sure gas is included. I'm not 100% sure. Don't quote me on that. It might be, but housing is not included. Housing is one of the most expensive things, in a person's life. I don't know how much, but like the reality is like, I don't think anybody believes the government inflationary data. We go out to a restaurant and we say, man, prices have doubled since before COVID. Now, inflationary data would say that it's gone up by like 60%. It's like, yeah, but the prices are literally double. And so that's one of the only reason. So that's like number one, their argument is that not only has like free trade taken so many impoverished people around the world out of poverty, like this is the argument, but it's actually made things better for people here in America. And that the truth is that that's not true. That's not true. So number one, there's that. So the second thing that I would say, shoot, my brain got stuck. Yeah. So again, I don't think Americans are better off than they were 30 years ago. Right. But the other thing is the only reason we have not had an impact of having to realize the full weight. We have realized it to a degree. Obviously, inflation has increased, right? But the only reason it hasn't been worse is because of the fact that the US dollar is the reserve currency for the world and people want to hold US dollars. So there's a demand for the US dollar from outside the country. And so like the only reason that we're able to do all those things is because we're printing money, right? So in other words, the libertarians want to pay down the debt, but the only way to be able to do that is we have to stop spending more money than we're making, right? But they want free trade internationally, right? I'm not doing a good job explaining this, but it doesn't work as the short version. So anyway, I guess Cider is saying some of the stuff that I'm talking about is exactly where Nick Fuentes built his platform out of, which is that people don't have the opportunity, these opportunities that we used to have. Which I get, which I think what part of the reason I think people are drawn to Fuentes is, and also the reason that people are drawn to Mamdani is a kind of similar, even though they're in polar opposite directions, is because people recognize this problem. And what you're essentially saying, and I think you're right, is that the Republican Party or the conservative movement is not actually offering a better, I mean, it is a better solution, let's just be very clear, but it's not actually a full solution. It's like, well, we're not as bad as them, rather than being like, we need to go this way, right? And I think people are looking for voices, and Fuentes is somebody who's saying something different, and so I think he's attracting attention. This is how we get there, and it's kind of, it seems a little radical, and I don't know all the tenets of what he's preaching, so I can't speak to it directly, but it seems like part of the concern is there are a lot of people looking at what the Republican Party is saying and being like, again, we'll go back to the 50-year mortgages and like, no, that's not what we're looking for, right? You know, on the left, they're saying we'll give you free stuff, and that's idiotic because it won't work long term. But 50-year mortgages are also not the answer. We need a real solution, I think, and that's why I think people are looking for other voices. And I don't know that Fuentes has the answers, but and I'm not looking to Fuentes for the answers. I'm trying to figure out like what's the best path forward myself, and I have my ideas, but I think that's part of the problem, and I think that's part of why people are looking to some of these other sources. I don't know if you agree, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah. I guess just kind of going back to what you were saying about the debt. Like I am sympathetic to libertarians because, you know, quantitative easing, like printing money endlessly to pay for all, you know, these big beautiful bills and whatnot. There's a good phrase that I heard somewhere, I forget who said it, but you know, being frivolous like this with our money, with our debt, it's like taxation without representation for the unborn, because you know all future generations are going to have to reap the consequences of this debt that is in the trillions now. So I'm sympathetic to that, but also you got to realize a lot of that debt comes from entitlements. It comes from Social Security. It comes from Medicare, Medicaid. And it would be political suicide for any politician, Republican or Democrat, to run on a platform of raising the age of Social Security. I'm pretty sure they tried to do that in France, and it was like, it was chaos. Because I mean, every person growing up wants to be able to retire and get, you know, health care at the same age that their grandparents or parents did. So really, it's kind of political suicide. But going back to Nick Fuentes, I think it's important to focus on his vision. So the title of his show is America First. Now, you know, we've heard Trump say America First. We've heard Charlie Kirk say America First. What does America First mean? And I think it's important to kind of go back to the founders, their original vision for America. And I saved this quote. It's by John Jay, who was he was a co-author of the Federalist Papers, and he was the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And I'll quote him. He said in the Federalist Papers, Providence has been pleased to give one connected country to one united people, a people descended from the same ancestors, speaking the same language, professing the same religion, attached to the same principles of government, and very similar in their manners and customs. Now, I think what that quote means is that, and this applies really to any nation, what makes a nation is not necessarily its principles, it's its people. It's the people that make up a nation that determine its nation's future. And the reason why America has succeeded is because of its people, the people that founded the country, the people that fought for the country, the people that stand for the country and its values. And I think a lot of people are trying to co opt that vision for America of America First by saying America is an idea. We're mere vessels. And this idea of America can be imported to other countries, regardless of the faith that those other countries profess, regardless of their culture. And really, that's just not true. And I think what has made America successful, and Tocqueville talked about this in Democracy in America. He was this French political philosopher that you know toured America in the 1800s, and he wrote this great penultimate book called Democracy in America, talking about the culture, how it descended from the Pilgrims that came here on the Mayflower, and how it's blossomed into this beautiful country with just this panoply of different churches and denominations and states and customs and manners. What made America so special, what made it exceptional, was that you know, we all formed these civic organizations on our own. We were the city atop a hill. We formed everything not because of the government was, breathing down our neck, telling us what to do, how to behave, and whatnot. We were the system of self-government, and that goes all the way back to the Mayflower Compact, which came before, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. From the beginning, we were a people of self-government. But we were also a Christian people. The people that came here on the Mayflower, they were Christian. They saw their vocation, entering the New World as a Christian undertaking. They saw themselves almost like the Israelites, fleeing persecution. The English separatists, they kind of saw themselves in a similar light. But all of this is to say, America is special because it's a distinct people, and we need to put America first. That means Americans, and Americans that are Christian, Americans that speak English, Americans that identify with the land, with the blood and the soil of the nation. That's what it means to be an American. And you can, Teddy Roosevelt, he said similar things too. Um, And I don't believe America is special because it's a melting pot, or because I don't think anybody can become an American. I definitely think it's possible to assimilate, but it's a lot harder to assimilate into our culture, at least what I believe our culture is, than what some people may believe. But so Nick has basically he's not pioneering this vision, he's kind of he's not the progenitor of this idea, America first. The philosophy behind it is deeply rooted in American political philosophy, um, but especially since the 70s, since the era of William F. Buckley and the era of neoconservatism, these voices have been labeled as like isolationists, as racist, chauvinist, when they're the only ones that are trying to conserve something. What have conservatives conserved? I mean, we've had, you know, 2 terms of Obama, 1 term of Biden, but pretty much every other, presidency since the year 2000 has been a Republican. But what else have we had other than gay marriage, you know, the normalization of transgenderism, a destroyed economy, foreign wars, like inflation, all this stuff, the debt rising. Obviously, we were talking about that earlier. Fentanyl epidemic. They haven't done anything, and I feel like there's this passage in the Bible, know them by their fruits. And you could say, well, the Republicans, their policies have been thwarted by the left, and I understand all that, but
and there's
really,
there is a significant degree of truth to that, but there's also like maybe a tactical side. But go ahead.
right, yeah. And I think I'm glad that Nick Fuentes is kind of in vogue right now, because I feel like he's almost like the return of the repressed, which is a concept that goes back to like Freud and Carl Jung. Basically, for the past, 60 years, Republicans have been shutting out these voices that are trying to keep America American, that are trying to prevent us from, getting entangled in all these foreign conflicts. These voices have been shut out, intentionally censored, blacklisted. And Nick Fuentes, who's quite the character, quite bombastic, quite provocative, he's coming out of the woodworks because the Republicans have basically only accepted one vision of America, which is basically tax cuts for corporations, endless
Yeah.
foreign wars, um, just ceding ground on social issues, being like, weak on abortion, weak on immigration, weak on everything. And Nick is coming along and like basically, exploding onto the scene because these other voices have been shut out for so long. Sam Francis, what I mean it when I say this. I think he is the most brilliant political philosopher to come out of America in hundreds of years. He wrote this fantastic book, which was influenced by James Burnham, who wrote this book called The Managerial Revolution, back in, I believe it was the 50s. And in this book, Sam Francis, who is very relevant to this discussion because he actually wrote a book on the failure of the conservatism movement called Beautiful Losers. In this book, Leviathan, that not James Burnham, Sam Francis wrote, he talks about how, after the Civil War, after we shifted from an agrarian economy to an industrialized one, there was this shift that took place, especially with the Great New Deal coming out of FDR in the 30s after the Great Depression, and of course in the 60s as well with the Civil Rights Movement and the Great New Society. Um, there was basically this revolution in the way that our system worked. Now, previously, you had the capitalist class, you had the oil barons and whatnot. They were the owners of capital. And then that shifted to a managerial system where basically bureaucrats, technocrats, managers ran everything because the capitalist class had no choice but to delegate their power to these managers because society was becoming far more technologically sophisticated. The population boomed due to better medicine and better nutrition. So basically, we developed this managerial system, which that's what James Burnham talked about in the managerial revolution. And this new class, this new elite, um, basically developed its own philosophy of how it thinks society should be run. Um, and it obviously believed in the concentration of power within the state. But what was the big threat to this new class that had developed in the 20th century was the community, was the family, was traditional religion, because those three things stand in the way of this state having this elite class of people from having complete authority over Americans. And what made Sam Francis so compelling is he talked about how, especially with the neoconservatives, they basically acquiesced to this managerial class. They became part of it. And that was the birth of the Uniparty. People say that, obviously we make divisions between the left and the right, but really, and what Nick Fuentes has talked about this, they really align on all the issues, especially when it comes to support for Israel. Obviously, there's voices now within the left, like Zoran Mandami, that are very anti-Zionist, but historically speaking, that's the one issue that they've all been able to, rally around, even Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and whatnot. But anyways, this uniparty developed within Washington, and it was really Trump who came along, and for the first time in a long time, probably since Patrick Buchanan, who tried to run for president in the 1990s, he basically said, like, no, these people, Republicans, the Bushes, the Clintons, you guys have sold out America to globalism. And we will no longer listen to the siren. Trump said this, I think, at his inauguration. We will no longer follow the siren song of globalism. That was the vision of Trump. But, you know, it's failed. Like Trump, a big reason why he won in 2024 was thanks to little tech, was to, these tech billionaires like Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen, to, these very pro-Zionist people like Miriam Adelson and Larry Ellison, who donated billions to his campaign. And all that money comes with strings attached. Um,
Well,
like,
he's not running for re-election.
no,
So
he's
it's like
not.
when you're not running for re-election, I
But
don't know how much those strings work. You don't need their money anymore. You're elected. You're the president. What are
well,
they going to do?
this was before he was elected. This was while he was running for president. And obviously, in any campaign, you need money, you need support, you need
But
patronage.
my point is though is like I don't like people. This is why term limits is a conversation we should consider. I'm not 100% for term limits. I understand where people are coming from, right?
Mhm.
But I think there may be other solutions, or I don't like not like a lifetime term limit, but more of like you have to take a break kind of thing. That's kind of what I think. But um yeah, like Cider has a couple comments that should be noted, and we'll get to those in just a second. But I think like yes, people want to attach strings to it, but once you're elected and you're the president of the United States, like what does he need their money for anymore? Right? He's the president. He can do what he wants. They can't. I mean, what can they
He
do?
can't. He can't do what he wants. I mean, that's not how
Well, I
Washington
don't.
works. There's
No.
factions. There's yeah.
I don't mean that he like legally can do anything that he wants, but I mean like what can they? He doesn't need anything else from them at this point. That's kind of my point.
Right. Well, I guess I would say in response to that, like, um, Trump isn't like an island. I mean, he's not a dictator. Like, as a president, you need to delegate power. You need to make compromises with other people in order to get your way, whether that's
Sure.
with Democrats, whether that's with foreign leaders. Like, if I scratch your back, you'll scratch mine. And I think somebody was saying recently that, Trump's decision to have, I think it was like 600,000 uh,
Oh,
Chinese
Chinese
people come,
students,
yeah,
Chinese
coming to
students. Yeah.
America. The reason why Trump is doing that is because he's trying to reach a compromise with China and whatnot. Um,
Well, he's trying to reach a compromise with China. I think there's another factor that plays into this, and I think it's an economic one that we maybe don't completely understand. Part of me wants to say just let them fail, but I think if we don't do that, there are a lot of universities across the country that will go under. I think that's part of the argument is like if we don't bring them over, these universities are going to fail. And I'm like,
then they should fail.
well, I mean, I'd say
Because
95% of the universities in our country don't do what they should do, and you could learn more with a YouTube education. I mean, depending on what you're doing, like if you're going to school and you're not looking to become a doctor, a dentist, a lawyer, an accountant, whatever, like these things where you need highly technical like skills, and engineer, whatever. I don't think many of those people don't need to go to college, right? That's the reality. A significant portion, especially with AI coming in and the impact there. But yeah, that obviously is a huge concern. I think Cider's saying that they're potential enemy insurgents, and we're dealing with China. I mean, that's not even a joke. That's like
yeah,
China is actively trying to undermine and take down the United States of America. That's a concerning, thing. But I wonder if like Trump's concern and part of the economic element is like, the current. I hate to say this, and I think people probably don't want to hear it, but like the economic situation in America is actually very fragile. And if those, as much as I'm like, well, they're not teaching anything that's worth being taught, the ripple effect, right, of those universities, that many universities failing all at once, could be catastrophic to our economy potentially. That might be the theory. I don't know. But that might be part of what's playing in there. But yes, I mean, obviously, in order to negotiate with China, he has to give them something, right? At least that's the idea. So, but anyway,
right. Yeah. So I guess I feel like I should talk more about the Tucker podcast, because it's really important,
well,
especially backlash from it. But
Well, I think it's important briefly to note that I think a big part of what I'm hearing as to why people are listening to Nick Fuentes is because he's addressing, like, again, I don't know. I'm going to have to do some more research on him because obviously a lot more people are paying attention to him, especially our Zoomers, and some millennials. And so I think it's important for us to kind of get a sense of what it is about what he's saying that is attractive to people. And I think you're trying to kind of lay that out to a degree. And I think it's that he's saying stuff that a lot of other people aren't saying. He's actually talking about some of these, some of the real problems that aren't actually really being addressed, such as, I don't know if he talks about this, but I imagine the part of the problem with the globalists, even with adding in the tariffs, who it doesn't get impacted by tariffs? Big tech.
Yeah.
Right. Which is the main problem. And we live in a country where we have antitrust laws. I don't know why, because we don't observe them. Right. We've allowed these major corporations that we've allowed them to be classified as a person, which means they've been given equal rights with humans. I'm not trying to thumbs up, and my phone my computer keeps thinking that's what I'm doing. But we've given corporations equal status with persons and humans in terms of a legal sense. And so they have protections under the Constitution, which I guarantee our founding fathers did not intend for a business to have equal, rights. I think that their businesses should have certain rights, but they shouldn't be the same as a human being. They should be different. But that was given, that right, that was an interpretation, at least, or whatever, that was given to them. But the fact that we don't hold and we allow companies like Apple, Amazon, Google, Microsoft to buy up all of their little competitors. As Cider is saying, Disney owns most family entertainment in the United States. These are monopolies. This is the reason that, like, pure capitalism without seatbelts, without safeguards, leads to oligopoly, which is just a economic version of oligarchy. Right. And so, this is where, what's interesting is these no kings people, they're always talking about topple the oligarchy, right? And many of the people leading them, like Bernie Sanders, are part of the oligarchy. They're part of the establishment that's running our country, the politicians who are becoming millionaires off of service to the state, to the country. But the other piece is that, all of these economic policies have lined the pockets of these corporations that have a stranglehold on the US and the world economy, really. And this is one issue that I don't really hear almost anybody talking about outside of, again, on the left. They're talking about taxing the rich and taking money away from them, which we all know that if they started doing that, they're just going to domicile in other countries. America's going to fall through the cracks, and Apple is just going to have a different home country and continue to make a crap ton of money off of the world. They're going to struggle, right, without having America, not being able to do as well in America. They're not going to do, but they're still going to be one of the most powerful companies in the world, right? They don't have debt, right? So, this is something that I feel like we could talk about. That is actually something. How do we actually address this oligopoly here? How do we force these companies to break up? How do we fix the problem of outsourcing IT and software development and all these other things? Although AI is going to destroy that. But at the moment, there are so many people that are working and doing jobs that used to be American jobs outside the country. Call centers, and again, call centers are largely going away, but there are a lot of jobs that have left because you don't have to pay certain taxes to pay, and you pay really small amounts, even if it's not manufacturing. There's the tech side, which again is not being impacted by the tariffs outside of for the devices or whatever. But anyway, Fuentes and the I think, again, all that I was trying to highlight there is there is a problem. We're not really addressing it. As you said, we're trying to hold back and slow down the left, but we're actually not having an equal and opposite response to it and saying, no. Not only are we're not just trying to slow that down. We're trying to go in this direction. We actually want to uphold the Constitution. We want to hold antitrust and we want to safeguard the family, etc. And I think that sounds to me, from what I'm hearing from you, like that's some of the stuff that Fuentes is actually saying.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. He does talk about a lot of that stuff. And I think, the reason why he resonates with so many people like myself, like all my friends that are close to me, they all watch Nick Fuentes. Like, I was talking to my good friend Luke, and one of his friends at work, he saw him watching Nick Fuentes. He's popular. And of course, like a lot of people are exposed to him on like Instagram Reels where they only see like a snippet of him saying something like really provocative, and their opinion of him is kind of based on these short clips. But I could say like I've watched him for a long time now, and yeah, especially during his super chat section of his show, where he takes donations from fans, which is his only source of revenue. It comes from that and his subscription service for his website to be able to access the archives and whatnot. But for most of the show, he has two stories which are relevant, and he talks about them, and they're brilliant. Like the way he could just go on tangents, and it's like kind of like Rush Limbaugh, like he was born for that. But anyways, I think part of the reason why he resonates so much is because he speaks to this disenchantment experience that so many Zoomers, especially young men, have experienced, growing up. Like, a lot of guys, they grow up in a single parent household, oftentimes their mother. So they grow up in a feminine environment, and then they go to school, and all their teachers are women. And then they go to college, and especially nowadays, more women than men are going to college, so they're in a feminine environment there. And then they go to work at some job, and every job, every high paying job for that matter, blue white collar, has been HRified. So there's things you can't say, things you can't do, and whatnot. And of course, you had the what was that movement where they were like, it, it was with that guy Weinstein. Um,
Is it Harvey Weinstein? Is that one of
Harvey
the?
Weinstein and like Kevin Spacey, where they were all being like canceled because of
Oh,
how
the
they,
Me Too movement.
yeah, Me Too movement. That played a big role in guys just being afraid of cold approaching women or doing anything risky around women. So a lot. I remember growing up in high school and seeing that and being like, oh shit, I don't want to end up like one of those guys. Just by you know kissing a woman or whatnot, or whatever, like not sexually harassing, but there's blurry lines when it comes to that stuff. But there was that, and then of course, the BLM movement, where I think a lot of young men kind of came to this realization that, like, yeah, there's a lot of anti-white racism in society, in the media, um, and conservatives aren't really combating this. They're kind of participating it, capitulating to the left on these issues when it comes to gay marriage, when it comes to race relations and whatnot. So, when I discovered Nick Fuentes, he took a hardline stance on all this stuff. And I feel like that's what we need, because the the rot in our society is so deep, deeper than I think anybody realizes, like in every way, like, with crime, in so many places throughout the country. Like, I know people that are afraid to leave their doors, leave their houses at night. Like, you go around Portland, Marginal Way, people having sex in public, these druggies, these homeless people. And like, I was at Buffalo Wild Wings a couple months ago. There was a freaking Somali who drove into the side of the building. Like, and how did these people get their license? And I saw this clip making the rounds recently from some Zoom meeting, some town council meeting, about giving um, DOT licenses to illegals, people that don't even speak the language. It's like, no wonder people can't drive for shit around here in South Portland. Is because, like, how are these people getting their licenses? They don't even speak English. And it's like all this stuff, in school, like, being told that America is inherently evil, like the 1619 Project that New York Times ran, that basically said that, racism is this country's original sin, and we'll never be able to expiate ourselves. We'll never be able to, you know, purge ourselves of this sin that is our whiteness. So there's a lot of guys that grew up and they're like, I don't want to be part of any of that feminism or anything. And like feminism and hookup culture totally ruined the dating market. Like basically every guy I know is single because every single woman is basically liberal now and has a nose ring and is pro-choice like till 9 months. And it's like none of them want to have kids. None of them want to start a family. None of them are Christian. And a lot of them just have like this sarcastic, like just school marmy. I don't want to sound mean, but bitchy attitude. And guys are like so done with that. And Nick talked a lot about that on the Tucker podcast. And Tucker, because he's a a pro-natalist, he wants people to have more children. He's like, yeah, I don't realize how bad the dating market is now. Like people are not having kids. I mean, the birth rate is falling. Um, but a lot of guys want it.
Let's talk about that too. Like part of the problem is that, like, I mean, a lot of what you're describing and a lot of the issue here is a culture issue, right? We don't actually
Right.
have a healthy culture. Like, not only do our laws not, and I think laws have an impact here. Like one of the things I've learned from this is why people should read the Old Testament. I don't know if you're a Christian, you read the Bible. Everybody's like, just read the New Testament. No. You got to read the Old Testament. It's really important. When you have good leadership, the country goes in a good way. When you have bad leadership, the country goes bad. So laws actually do like culture and sometimes they say politics is downstream from culture, and there's a degree of truth there, but culture and politics actually have a symbiotic relationship where they impact one another, right? And so like politics impact culture, culture impacts politics. But we're anti-children in so many different ways in our society. And like part of the reason that a lot of like you have a lot of people that it's not even about like their careers, like women just not wanting to have children because they don't value children. There's this like kind of attitude, which is really bad and dangerous for a society in general. Our culture is broken, is essentially what I'm saying. And so that anyway, like women are taught to hate and not care about children in a lot of the school system. Like children are seen as this thing that's going to get in the way of their true happiness, which somehow has to do with working a 9-to-5 job, which I don't know if you talk to these men out there, but that's not why we do the 9-to-5 job, because we're like, oh my gosh, I just love, there are some workaholic men, but we should not be encouraging that. But it's not, we don't do it. Men, generally speaking, don't do it because they're like, how can I like be away from my family all day? It's actually the opposite. It's like, how can I support and protect and provide for my family? That's what really motivates men. And so if we had families, men would actually work a lot harder. Right. And get a lot more done because they get their promotions so they can take care of their family. Anyway.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Like when you like I have a daughter, I feel like I have skin in the game. Like I'm not just living for myself anymore, and that makes life 10 times more rewarding. But for whatever reason, a lot of women are more content being bossed around by, some boss that doesn't even care about them rather than having a husband who doesn't boss them around and loves them and provides for them. But I don't know. That's them. But anyway, so like, Nick, he's very anti-feminist. Some would say misogynist. I wouldn't really see him as misogynist. I think he's just speaking to this discontent that a lot of guys have with the feminization of society in general. And so there's all that. And so Nick went on the Tucker podcast. I'll get to it now. And basically after that, there was this huge backlash from so many voices, like the $7,000 Club. That's a nickname for this group of conservatives on X. that they're called the $7,000 Club because there was this document that was leaked or something, basically saying that Israel like pays conservative influencers money to parrot, pro-Zionist talking points. So a lot of guys came out like Josh Hammer, of course, Ben Shapiro, many others, Mark Levin, and we're basically saying like Nick is like vermin. Jordan Peterson has called him a rat, and this is coming from Jordan Peterson, who's this guy that's supposed to see the value in all people, yet he's telling Benjamin Netanyahu, give him hell after October 7th, like go bomb him. But anyways, um, he's getting a lot of flack from all these conservative voices, and the backlash ramped up times 10 because I think it was a couple days after when everybody was calling for Tucker Carlson to be canceled for platforming Nick, the Heritage Foundation, its president, released a statement because there were these rumors going around that Heritage Foundation, which is a think tank in Washington, they publish a lot of policy papers and whatnot for sitting members of Congress and whatnot, a lot of statistics. They're basically like the brain of Washington D.C., along with the Cato Institute and a bunch of other conservative think tanks. But the president, took a bold stand and was like, there are rumors going around that we're trying to separate ourselves from Tucker Carlson because of his recent platforming of Nick Fuentes. And, the president of Heritage Foundation was like, look, we don't appreciate these, I'm not, repeating verbatim what he said, but this is kind of the gist of, I'm paraphrasing. He basically said, like, we're not going to utilize the left's tactics of shutting out people from the conversation. If somebody has a heterodox perspective, if they have a different viewpoint, then we should debate them in the marketplace of ideas. And if their viewpoint is bad, then ours will triumph over theirs. And he was like, we're America first, we're Christ first, and that's important because a lot of people, for whatever reason, just because Candace Owens and other voices like Nick have started saying Christ is King, now that's become an anti-Semitic dog whistle because Jews obviously don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. And a lot of conservatives who are anti-Zionist say Christ is King. So suddenly that's bad, I guess. But anyways, so after this statement was released by the president of the Heritage Foundation, like people within the conservative movement were irate because what this goes to show is that the subset of the right wing, which is anti-war, anti-mass immigration, anti-Zionist, you know pro-Christianity, pro-nationalism, that group, that subset of the Republican Party, like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes, and many others.
For the record, I can't hear you keep saying Candace without saying she's crazy. You know that, right?
No, I don't follow. Yeah, I'm not a Candace Owens fan. I'm just saying, like,
right, she's part of that group that is like they're trying to cancel. I think like I don't think anybody should cancel her. Feel free to go and listen to her, but like you go in with an open mind. But I think I'm somebody who, like, back in 2020 discovered Candace and really appreciated her at the moment. And so I actually had like heavily followed her when she joined the main wire, the Daily Wire. When she left the Daily Wire, I canceled my Daily Wire membership because I didn't like the way that was handled. And believed more of her stuff because at the time, but I just, the stuff that I've watched since, one of my biggest critiques of her is basically that she'll have a 45-minute long episode where supposedly she's going to reveal some information, and she just spins a narrative and reveals very little except her view of this like really small thing. And you're supposed, and so it's really all about like trying to like, I don't know. I think she's a grifter, but that's just me.
Yeah. No, I
But
agree. I agree. And in fact,
but
she actually interviewed Nick Fuentes, and Nick Fuentes went into the interview thinking it would be a substantive, I can never freaking pronounce that word. Um,
substantive.
substantive, thank you. Discussion, where they talked about ideas, not people. And of course, it ended up devolving into this like struggle session about like, whether he's why is he not married, like why is he like anti-women, like going through all his radioactive comments of the past. And I think that's because she's kind of I don't know, she's oriented more toward the spectacle than
Oh,
ideas.
100%.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah,
but
yeah. No, she's
yeah,
all
that
about
kind of goes without saying, she's out to lunch, but
clickbait. Yeah. Like how
yeah.
can we get yeah, that's it's so sad because she had such a potential to be a voice that's
Yeah,
more than just one that profits. Like the beauty is you can actually speak truth, and like if you're really good at it, you can be profitable doing it. But but like yeah, she just I don't know. Like I feel like there's something that I'm missing that's really what's going on with her, or she's just like cooked. She's
right. But going back to what I was saying earlier about the Heritage
yeah.
Foundation, that statement from the president, the moral panic that ensued after he had released that statement is like, I don't know how any person in Washington, any up and coming Republican who wants to work in DC, wants to participate in the political world, cannot see that like immune response from the establishment to try and ward off this up and coming faction within the Republican Party. I don't know how anybody cannot see that as something other than what it is, which is they are afraid. They're fearful because their ideas have lost. Like my generation, not just on the left, but on the right, is not okay with what's happening in Israel. And, a lot of young men want to grow up in a society that is traditional, where they can have a wife and have children and go to church and live in a safe society without crime, without fentanyl. And the voices that have tapped into that have their finger on the pulse is not Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro goes on Joe Rogan and he says that Jesus was a rebel who died for his troubles. Okay. So, these people like Mark Levin, and then they start attacking Tucker and Nick in just the most vehement way. And the moral pan, I remember seeing this one tweet in response to, the Heritage Foundation and their statement. There was this guy, some Republican, some wannabe, no name, I don't even know, but he tweeted like Jews need to go out and start buying guns now. Like this is going to be the next Holocaust, and it's like Tucker, who lives out in Maine, in the middle of nowhere, in Bryant Pond, just has some young guy come on his show. They don't even really talk a lot about Jews per se. Um, but just like him, like sitting down at a table talking with Tucker Carlson, who's not an anti-Semite, I can tell you. He is not an anti-Semite. I don't. I shouldn't even have to say that.
No, I
Um,
mean
Really, that term anti-Semite, it's funny that Jews have their own term for racism. There's not like a special term for blacks or for whites. When we see racism towards blacks, discrimination, we say that's racist. When we see anti-white discrimination, we say that's racist. But with Jews, it's anti-Semitism. But there's a
so
lot of people,
let's
there's a
actually
lot of
be very
Muslims.
clear. Let's be very clear about something. There is no such thing as racism against white people. That's just justice.
Oh yeah, yeah,
you forgot
yeah.
you forgot your leftist speaking points.
Right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
but
You're right. I like racism toward, you can't be racist towards whites because racism is based on a system of discrimination that was built by, and a system that was built by and for white people at the expense of minorities and
there you
BIPOC.
go. Yeah,
So
there you
yeah.
go. There are your leftist speaking points. No, but sorry, go back
Yeah.
to your point. Sorry.
Yeah, but it's interesting. There's a special term for that term. It can mean anything. Like the term has grown to encompass so many different things that it ceases to have any meaning. Like if you're anti-Zionist, if you're against what Israel is doing, then you're an anti-Semite to a lot of
Well,
people.
can we talk really briefly? Because like when you
Yeah,
say Zionist, right? Because I
right,
don't think everybody knows what this means,
right.
and I think there may be multiple definitions. But like, what when you say like Zionist or anti-Zionist, what do you mean?
Well, there's some people like when you say you're an anti-Zionist, a lot of people will say, "Well, do you believe that Israel has a right to exist?" And of course, like, yeah, I mean, I don't want Israel to be bombed off the map. I believe that everybody that lives there, that is a citizen there, has a right to live there. I mean, they shouldn't be like, it shouldn't be like a mass eminent domain situation where they all just get booted and shipped to some other country. Of course, they have a right to exist. What I'm against is the genocide that's happening in Gaza, like and I know that there's been some peace deals that have been made recently, which obviously is good. Whether they'll last, whether they won't, I don't think they will.
Well,
Um,
we're talking about like uh, uh,
yeah,
dealing with the issue between Islam and, even though it's not all faith related necessarily for the Jews, the Zionists, the Israelis.
mm,
A lot of them are more secular. They're not like written as I don't know. I'm not like an expert in what's like their religious observances, but what my
yeah,
understanding is a lot of like Jews these days um are more secular. They're not necessarily as religious, even though some aspects of what I hear Zionism can mean is has to do with like reestablishing the historic borders of the nation of Israel, right? And that's what sometimes like I have some friends who are Arabs, and that's what they see Zionists as. That's why they don't
right,
like Zionists. Is number one, they believe that that's their land, and that it was
right,
taken from them illegally, and they deserve to have it back, and they don't care where the Jews go. They just don't think the Jews should be there, and
mm,
they would call anybody who believes that the Jews have a right to exist in holding that land as Zionists. And then there's like you like and so like according to even and then so again there's people who think that Israel has the right to exist or Zionists, or there's the other definition of people of Zionists being people who want to expand the the area of Israel, or people who
right,
are more okay with what happened in Gaza, and which is a very contentious thing. I've largely tried to stay out of it
yeah,
to be honest, especially in public spaces, because and it's again it's very contentious, and
right,
I've been very concerned from the very beginning with how if you're attacked, I do think like there's a military response can be it can be appropriate, obviously, if you're attacked, but like what Israel is doing is like I'm uncomfortable with, but it's also not my country, right? And so
right,
I'm not neither side. I'm on neither side in a sense. Like I'm against I'm against atrocities. If the reports are true of what the what the people in Gaza did leading up to it, I'm against that. I'm also kind of
yeah,
against like
me too.
mass bombing all of these buildings, and a lot of the people. I feel like one of my biggest concerns too with the way in which Israel has been responding is that I feel like it's damaging for them. It's dangerous for them, because even if you're right, so like and that Hamas is this horrible terrorist organization that you need to completely eliminate. The reality is, by doing it the way that you're doing it, you're creating more Hamases. And
Right,
so I don't see I don't see how this helps you in the long run.
mm,
Um, and so I'm very concerned with it for that reason, is on top of like, yes, there are a lot of innocent children, because children are, even if the adults are doing bad things, the children are innocent, and
right,
they're being killed at really high levels. And so yeah, anyway, so I think there's that whole mess that's going on there, which is very complex and very like, yeah, anyway, some people would say
yeah,
it's not complex, but I think that there's those distinctions about Zionism, and kind of what the people are concerned with, and kind of where things are coming. But to your comment, which kind of led me to talk for longer than I intended about like, I don't know if the piece is going to last. The short version, I'll give you the cliff notes. It's not, because like those people groups, are basically, they might as well be the Capulets and the Montagues, right? They
Right.
have a historic feud that is
It's a blood feud.
it is a blood feud, and the hate goes both ways, and
Yeah.
people are not going to what do you want to call it? People are they're not ever going to give up on it. You know what I mean? They're never going to admit that the other side deserves what they believe is theirs, and so it's going to continue. Maybe peace, as long as we can keep it, is great. But
Right.
yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I mean,
So, but to your point is like,
Yeah.
if there's any like, I think what you were kind of talking about, which kind of led into this, so I kind of
Schism,
give
yeah.
it back to you, is this this idea that to even have conversations like the conversation we're having today,
Right.
is like, we could be labeled in today's definitions of how some people are using it as being anti-Semitic, and that's kind of what's happening with Tucker and what's
Yeah.
happening with with Nick, obviously, and with others.
And sorry, that dovetails perfectly into what I was going to talk about next. So what's interesting is that after, the whole thing with the Heritage Foundation, after Tucker had Nick on his podcast, Dinesh D'Souza, who I had mentioned earlier, canceled Jared Taylor and Sam Francis. He actually debated Nick Fuentes a couple months before Charlie Kirk had passed away. I think Alex Jones was the host of the debate, and I honestly respect Dinesh D'Souza a lot for doing that, because not many conservatives, mainstream conservatives, have I mean, obviously we had Tucker, but even Candace Owens, who started parroting a lot of Nick Fuentes' talking points, didn't have him on until pretty recently. But what's interesting is, I remember we went to the Charlie Kirk event last August, and I was there with my best friend, and I was shocked because I think of how Charlie Kirk sounded back in 2019 in that clip I was talking to you about earlier, where all the Groypers approached him at the Q&A and was holding his feet to the fire. Like, he was a pretty lukewarm small c conservative then. Obviously he was against gay marriage, he was a traditional Christian and whatnot. His religious values were staunchly conservative, but in terms of his economic values and whatnot were pretty, mainstream establishment, I would say. And then, after seeing Charlie at that speaking event, I was like, oh my gosh, he's talking about the Great Replacement. He said the Great Replacement is real. You Mainers are being replaced by Somalis. And I'm like, hell yeah. Like, why can't more Republicans be talking about this? Like, I don't see, you know, Ted Cruz taking this tone, you know what I mean? But Charlie Kirk was. I'm like, what changed? And I thought to myself, I'm like, well, what's one voice that has been really changing the Republican Party from the inside out over the past 5 or 6 years? Nick Fuentes. Like, he's moved the goalpost on so many of these issues, where even Tucker Carlson back in, I think, 2023, before he was booted from Fox News, talked about the Great Replacement, which, if you don't know, the Great Replacement is this theory that was pioneered by this French philosopher, political philosopher, Renaud Camus. And he basically said, like, the Great Replacement is this idea that in all these countries, which historically have been white and European, are being replaced because of, like, the domestic population, the native population in places like, Britain and France and Sweden, in America and Canada. they've just seen this spike in immigration because it's politically advantageous for the elite. A lot of these immigrants tend to vote left. So, a lot of states, especially in America, like California is the perfect example. They had, a Republican governor. They had Ronald Reagan at one point, and now it's basically like a guaranteed blue state. It used to be Republican. They had Arnold Schwarzenegger as governor. But anyways, I digress. Um, yeah, like at this event, I was shocked because I'm like, Charlie, he sounds a lot like Nick now. And then going back to what I was saying earlier about Dinesh D'Souza, after Tucker platformed Nick, uh, Dinesh D'Souza released a screenshot of a text conversation he had with Charlie Kirk shortly after Dinesh D'Souza debated Nick. And in the text conversation, Charlie Kirk said, basically, I'm paraphrasing, I'm not repeating what he said verbatim, but Charlie said, like, he has no place within the conservative movement. Like, he's vermin. You should not be, complimenting him based on his ability to articulate himself. Like, that's just, basically like saying he's someone who's worthwhile talking to. And I'm like, I saw that and I was so disappointed because, especially after Charlie Kirk died, everybody was saying like he was a champion of free speech. Like he would go on these college campuses and debate people, leftists, who hold these very abhorrent views, who would insult him based on his appearance. And in the end, who killed Charlie Kirk? It wasn't Nick. It wasn't someone who he thinks shouldn't have a voice. It was a leftist. It was someone, part of the group that he spent his whole life talking to on college campuses. So the right is treating Nick like he's a monster, like he's the boogeyman, like he's going to create a second Holocaust or something. And then like leftists are killing us. You have the Virginia governor who just won, who, there was a text conversation that was leaked where he was calling for conservatives to die, to be killed. And that's, violence on the left is going mainstream. And meanwhile, you have the right, basically like up in arms over people talking. And I see that and I'm like, we are playing right into their hand. We're bickering back and forth over what conservatism should be. And Zoran Mandami is winning. Minneapolis, they're, of course, they're basically like Somalia now. And then of course what's happening in Virginia, I'm like, going into the midterms, we're screwed because we can't defeat this faction of the Republican Party that is just so hell-bent on staying in power, on staying in these think tanks, on staying in Washington D.C. so they can go to parties and rub shoulders with guys in suits, and like they don't care about Americans. And I wanted to bring that up, that whole thing with Dinesh D'Souza, because I'm like, that's really an indictment of the Republican establishment. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, but Charlie Kirk was part of that. Like, shortly before he passed away, like there were these rumors going around that Israel had a role to play in his death, but it because he was changing his tune on Israel and whatnot, but he wasn't. In fact, he had sent a message for Benjamin Netanyahu saying, like, look, I'm seeing this. As I tour the country, a bunch of people on both the left and the right are very anti-Israel. Like, you guys need to up your game with social media, because social media is what's really driving the conversation and moving the goalposts on all these issues. So you guys need to step up your game. So like I see that and I'm disappointed, and it makes me glad that I've kind of stuck by Nick and Tucker and all these other voices, because all the others are being hypocrites. They claim to be pro free speech, but they're pro censorship, and I'm like, I don't want to be a part of that. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one thing. There are a couple of things I have to say. Like I'm a huge fan of Mr. Kirk.
And as am I.
No, I think it's important, but I think it's important to note that like there's no person that you're ever going to find out there that did everything that I think we're going to look back through a certain lens and say was perfect. At the same time, right? Like, so I think it's there. Like one of the things that I think Charlie Kirk was actually really, really, really sharp about was recognizing that there are things that we need to do tactically in order to be successful, in order to win in the moment in which we're at. Right. And like, obviously some of the things that you said in this, and I'd have to go back and look and verify them. You've been pretty accurate in most of the things that we've talked about in the past, but some of the stuff that they were starting to challenge Charlie Kirk with, and then now as Charlie Kirk that I knew, because I didn't really pay attention to who he was before 2020, and I didn't really pay a lot of attention to him even after that. It wasn't really until like 2023 into 2024 that I was really hyper focused on what he was doing and realized how impactful and how influential he had become in younger generations, and how that was impacting and ended up influencing the 2024 election. But he was very tactical, right? And very tactically masterful in the sense that like he did tons of interviews and tons of conversations, and he talked about like really like controversial issues, especially ones where we lose on the right, so such as abortion. He also had a ton of conversations where he talked about faith, which isn't necessarily something that helps us win elections again, right? And so what's interesting is like I didn't even see much of that content until after the 2024 election. That's really, I sometimes say that's really where I learned more about like where Charlie Kirk's faith, how significant and how like the Charlie Kirk's faith is a lot of what drove him. And there's a lot of tactic involved in a lot of the decisions that he made. And I can imagine there's a world in which he's like, we can't touch Fuentes right now. He would be toxic to the movement. Let's avoid him. Like I could imagine that being something that's like, if we embrace him, we will definitely lose in 2024. I can imagine. I don't know for sure. I'm coming up with a potential reason why he might. I don't know. He's not here. Maybe he was just wrong, right? To like, but there was, So and again, obviously he was somebody who basically would largely debate with anyone. And so it is kind of interesting, right, that he refused to ever bring on Nick Fuentes. But, like one of the things that I would say, and I still haven't looked enough into Fuentes, but like one of the concerns that I have when I first started hearing the name, and I also watched some of his videos, like one of the things that I'll tell you is that like, what was it, like less than a month before Charlie was assassinated, Fuentes was doing this thing where he said Charlie Kirk isn't a Christian because of whatever it was that he was saying, and he was like doing his whatever it is thing, like he seems like he always like seems angry when he's talking. I've not watched a lot of his stuff, but that's the sense I get. And by the way, that like kind of tone and attitude is just a huge turn off for me. And I'm like, dude, I don't really want to listen to you. But especially when you talk about somebody and say he's not even a Christian, and then after he's dying, you're talking about how much, even though you disagreed with him, you really appreciated him. And it's like, well, that's just kind of interesting. But like I can imagine, without looking into it, my initial thoughts were this guy's just like trying to profit off of the conservative news outlets by talking about things that he knows are controversial in order to gain followers, not really in order to try and help positively reshape American culture, right? And it's and like I don't know for sure. Again, there's a lot of stuff I don't know about Charlie and what he was thinking and where he was coming to his conclusions, but I could imagine having that concern around somebody, because I have that concern about people that I meet, and like, is this person real, or are they just trying to find a way to make profit off of what's happening in the political? I mean, I've actually thought that question. We'll talk about like Ben Shapiro. I listened to a lot of him, and I found him to be very informative, but I'm like, does he really want the Republican Party to do well? Because I think he makes more money when the Republican Party does poorly.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And if you were really ideologically aligned with the things that you talk about, I would imagine you would be focused not just on making money, but then spending that money to influence elections.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
but I don't
absolutely.
necessarily get the sense that that's what's happening. And so like so I don't care what kind of influencer you're talking about. I'm like, okay, is this person about themselves and making a profit, or are they about trying to make a positive influence in our world? And so there are a lot of those things that play into that. But maybe this is one of those things where Charlie just should have debated him. He should have just brought him
Right.
on and had a conversation. I don't know.
And
But
that's
yeah.
what Nick wanted, actually. And shortly before, it's so tragic that he passed away, because Candace Owens, you know, it's unfortunate that it had to be her, but she was trying to arrange a debate between Charlie and Nick, because they're both kind of similar in the sense that they're conservative, both of them, and they're young men,
Christian,
and
right?
they yeah
Prentice is also
yeah, and that's another thing too that I'll say is, you know, during Nick's part of his show where he gets donation messages and whatnot, the super chat section, I can't tell you how many times I've heard him get donations from people whose lives have been transformed positively from his show and what he said. Because number one, he's Catholic, and I wouldn't say the only reason, but the biggest reason why he's taken a stance against Israel and what they're doing in Gaza is because he thinks what's happening is morally abhorrent. Like, even though it's not our country, even though it's not really our business to meddle with what's going on over there in the Middle East,
I
like,
think that actually is why he was saying Charlie's not a Christian, because he doesn't care about what's happening in Gaza. Therefore,
right.
he's not. Anyway, continue.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's why I'm remembering.
Yeah, which I don't agree with. But yeah,
Right.
like, I think this idea that Nick is trying to cynically benefit from people's discontent with the system and trying to, you know, fuel the flames and whatnot and just tear everything down. Like, Rod Dreher recently published an article in I think it was the American Conservative. He's a, political conservative columnist. And he was saying, like, something like 40% of young and up and coming Republicans in Washington D.C. are groypers. And he's saying, like, talking about how these people just want to tear the system down and how they're kind of like nihilistic and don't really care. And I don't see that. Um, I don't think that's what the Groyper movement is. Obviously, there's plenty of bad actors. There's plenty of people that latch on to these movements because they're ideologically motivated, and they're working in bad faith. But I think with Nick, really, if you want to judge his character, it's by his fruits, what he's sacrificed. I mean, he's been debanked, he's been put on a no-fly list, he's been deplatformed from basically every single social media app, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, D Live. I mean, he can't use payment processors, he can't use PayPal, and everything. And most people, especially if they don't really have any career prospects, from what they're saying, would change their political beliefs to align more with the consensus opinion on stuff, so they could have a career, so they can work in Washington or work at a think tank. And he was going down that road, but he saw an issue within conservatism, and he felt like he needed to take a principled position on these issues, and he was basically shut out from that world. And as someone myself, I went to college, I went to Gordon. I wanted to have a career in politics. I feel like my skill is in writing, and I'd love to be a columnist at, like, I don't know, the American Conservative or the National Review or one of these magazines, or I've written for the Federalist and whatnot. But with my opinions, with my beliefs, would never have a career in that world. I'd never be able to be a politician. Neither would Nick. And I respect him for not being a careerist, for suffering all these consequences. And he hasn't. I mean, he's made a lot of money, but from his fans, it's grassroots. He doesn't run ads. He's not like Ben Shapiro, who's talking about ZipRecruiter every 2 minutes and taking time out of his show to, like, tell people to subscribe to the Daily Wire and whatnot. Like Nick, he just goes on his show, he talks for 2 hours, and then that's it. And it's just his words. And I really respect people who don't go along with the crowd. I don't respect martyrs. I don't respect people who intentionally try to stir the pot just for attention. And yeah, he does rage bait sometimes. I brought up the whole tweet earlier, your body, my choice. I think that has less to do with him wanting to just stir shit up, and more so that's who he is. He's a mischievous guy. He
Well,
says
I
well,
oh, sorry, go
you
ahead.
know,
Yeah. I
yeah,
was
no,
gonna say partly that, like, I think Charlie said some things, like, did some of those types of things himself,
yeah,
right? I think,
yeah.
and not to the
It's
same
fun.
degree, but I think he said some things, like, that maybe he didn't need to say, but
Yeah.
it's a way to, like, make other people feel more comfortable to even engage in this
And
conversation.
honestly,
Fuentes goes further, but I think that there's
yeah,
an aspect of people being afraid to speak. And in order to get people to say things in this category, you have to say something over here and
right.
prove that you can get away with it in order for people to be even feel comfortable. You know what I mean? It's like it's
That's
about
a
moving the
really good
Overton
point.
window to a degree. Yeah, I think that's the term that we would use. Yeah.
That's a really good point. And honestly, I don't think that tactic is bad. I mean, look at Trump. Like when he announced his presidency, when he came down the escalator, he said they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. Some of them, I assume, are good people. And then, the Muslim ban. He's like, we need to prevent these people from coming into the country until we could figure out what the hell is going on. And then, during the Republican debate, when, he's being questioned by Megyn Kelly on his comments about women, and she's like, "You've called women fat slobs," and he was like, "Only Rosie O'Donnell." It's like you could say, "Okay, co- come on, Trump. Like this is not how politicians are supposed to talk."
Yeah.
But you got to realize there's some wisdom in that because, like, what do we know Republicans for? They're the guys with the bow ties, the Paul Ryans that come on there, that come on like Ted Cruz, and their intonations are very like proper and very gentlemanly, and like it's great to have your shit together, to be soft spoken. Like Ronald Reagan, he was called the great communicator for a reason, is because his words, they were magical. But there's also a place for the misfits, you know what I mean, for the people that are going to say crazy stuff, because if we didn't have those people, like I think we'd have a lot of us would feel like we're walking on broken eggshells. Like Trump, I wouldn't say he single-handedly destroyed political correctness, but he dealt a huge blow to it. Well, where now people feel like, yeah, I can talk about this stuff. I can make jokes like him because he's funny. He's objectively funny. Like when you
Yeah.
like when you say something funny and you get people to laugh, like that has so much purchase with people. And Nick Fuentes, like even the left acknowledges the guy is hilarious. That's one reason why I love watching him, really, is he's so funny.
Well, this
Like,
gets to a point. We should probably wrap up pretty soon. We've been going over 2 hours, but that I kind of had mentioned to you off the air is like, do people like? Again, part of what I don't know is like, do younger people like take him seriously and think he's like a leader, or is it more one of those things where he's like saying some things, maybe not what people really believe, but people like that he's saying things that you're not supposed to say because these are things that a lot of people are thinking and they're afraid to talk about. And even though Trump talks about certain things, there are still things you can't talk about in the Republican, the conservative movement. And he's talking about them and he's being kind of funny. And I think I wonder if people just look at him and be like, that's kind of cute. That's kind of funny. I know who he is. I pay attention because he says things that get people riled up on both sides of the aisle. And I kind of like that because I don't trust either side of the aisle, right? Or is there because I think, and maybe and then I think this is a question that I have is like, are people like Charlie Kirk was this like, not only did he say good things, but he was seen as this like leader that people wanted to follow, right? Obviously, he
right.
started Turning Point. He's got this massive movement even after he's gone. Like, is that Nick Fuentes in a different fashion, or is he more just somebody who has influence through things that he says, and partly because he's saying things you're not supposed to say, which makes people feel more comfortable? And does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting question because the New York Times and the Atlantic and a bunch of different, high profile magazines have been publishing pieces basically saying like, is Nick Fuentes like the next Charlie Kirk? And to your question, like whether he's serious, whether people actually see him as a leader, I think most people who know of him or see him, they see him from those clips where he's saying crazy stuff. And from that, you could say, yeah, they don't see him as a leader until they actually like start watching his show in full. And that's why I get really agitated when people say, like, oh, Nick is a Fed, or Nick is this, or Nick is that, when they've seen the clips on X from Benny Johnson showing all these heinous things he said in the past, or like other clips, short bits of his monologues and whatnot, but they've never seen a show in its entirety. And I think once you hear how like spirited he is, how passionate he is, yeah, it's someone you do want to see as a leader. Like I don't see him as the leader of, conservatism as a whole, but I do see him as a key important figure for the future development of the right. Um, and I think a lot of people don't take him seriously because they see, the clips and whatnot, but it makes them curious. So they read more into him, they watch more of his content. And then there's a reason why, like Rod Dreher said, like 30 to 40% of, you know, uh, the up and coming Republicans in Washington, working in Washington, are groypers. I mean, even Charlie Kirk, like, there were some like whistleblowers in TPUSA that were saying like, yeah, like a lot of the young men in TPUSA are groypers. Like they kind of have to disguise themselves because if they, come out in the open and say like, yeah, I follow Nick Fuentes, like they would obviously be booted. But yeah, I don't think he's going away. Um, Whether he's like the next Charlie Kirk, I think, like you said, Charlie Kirk is irreplaceable. There's something about his message that was unique to him, and I don't think it's right to say that someone like him can be replaced. But I definitely think, at least for young men, um, Nick Fuentes is definitely going to be a big name in the coming years. And I think a lot of people will start changing their tune to match his, as they already have. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, and I think Charlie is irreplaceable because not only was he like, did he have like a very unique voice, but I think he did a really great job of listening to the people, and he knew how to gain influence within the movement without, I believe, sacrificing his values. And he also adapted and adjusted. Like again, as
Right.
you kind of noted, like he wasn't like he made the comment that you made from the past about like how he um said let's staple a green card to your diploma. Like he's far from that. In fact, I was
Oh, yeah.
disappointed. I was actually disappointed when somebody asked a question that people thought was my question, which was about how long it's taking to get my wife here. It was somebody asked almost the same question, like, "Geez, what do you think we need to fix the legal immigration process?" And his response was, "I think we need to stop immigration." And I'm like,
Right.
"Oh, can my wife
Moratorium. Yeah.
can my
Complete
wa-
shutdown.
can my wife get here first, please? Thank you." And so I think I would have a hard time. Like, there are some complicating factors. Like I'm even somebody who can be like even sympathetic to that idea, even though I'm like it would hurt my situation. By the way, I would leave because I'm going to spend time with my wife. If I can't get
Right.
her here, I'm going to go
Yeah.
spend time with her until the moratorium's over. Sorry, you lose me.
Right.
That's but like I could be sympathetic to the idea because we have to fix our process. We have to fix our system here. We have to make sure that people who are coming here are assimilating. We have to make sure we can house and take care of and have an economy to satisfy the people who are existingly here. But anyway, he was more he wanted to. So but he did learn and adapt, I guess, is what I would say. As he listened to people, he had an open mind, even if he didn't talk with Mr. Fuentes. But anyway, I think this has been a long enough episode at this point. Probably
Sorry,
we're
I'm
gonna
plugging in my phone here.
No, you're fine. We've reached a record for how long this has been. So if anybody's stuck with us the whole time, we really appreciate it. One way or the other, I appreciate it. Thank you for coming on, Forrest. It's been a really interesting
Thank you.
conversation, as always, and I think hopefully more people are having conversations about this and not just being dismissive and trusting. Like there's two different dangers I think we have at this point. Is one, to not listen and not do research and not look into stuff because people are saying that if you do that, you're an anti-Semite, for instance.
Right.
The other concern is that we just completely buy nonsense and buy into like some of the more problematic things that are being presented out there. So there are concerns on both ends. And I would say like some of the stuff that, for instance, Candace is selling at this point is kind of crazy. I think we should approach things with an open mind, but not a crazy mind if we can avoid it. So it's a difficult tightrope to walk. But I think it's something that we need to do. I don't know if you're still there because I can't see you.
Oh,
there you
sorry.
No, you're good. But yeah, so yeah, thanks for coming on and having, this is twice we've talked about things you're not supposed to talk about if you want to be safe. So I appreciate it. And I think it's worth people, thinking about and considering, because we have to figure out, I think one of the biggest takeaways here is like, we need an actual message for what it is that we're for. What is it that we're conserving? If we're conservatives, what are we trying to get back to? What's actually healthy for a society, rather than just let's try and stop the crazies, because that's not good enough. Right. I think we actually need to be better about, we want to have a future where people can afford to buy a house with a 30-year mortgage. We want, we want to deal with the national deficit. We have to have a better, immigration policy and all that kind of stuff. So, and we have to address like these horrible corporations that are controlling more and more of the world. That's a serious threat to freedom. And the globalists and this like cutting taxes for corporations. While I agree there's the potential for it to stimulate economic growth, it's primarily economic growth for the major corporations, which, yes, people have 401ks. I get it. It benefits them in their retirement, blah, 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 but not as much as having more mom and pop stores, having more businesses, having more locally owned stuff, and having the power of the economic situation in our country being condensed to a very, very, very few. So anyway, there's that. So thanks again. And thank you everybody for watching. We'll see you back here, I believe on Monday, maybe Tuesday. I can't remember which day it is. Monday, I think I've got something going on. So we'll look at probably Tuesday for our next podcast. So thank you all. And thanks again, Forrest.
Thank you.